This is the Havens House, 1743 Havens House. Today is January 18th, 2018. 270 something years after this was built. Amazing, right? So right now we're in the formal living room, and we've removed the plaster and the lath in several places, actually, not just in this room, but throughout the building. And we've exposed these beautiful red oak beams, and we're going to leave these exposed so people can see them in the future. In between the beams is these beautiful wide planks, which are in some cases 20 inches wide, most likely a softwood, probably pine, also from Eastern Long Island. This is a post and beam building. You have the corners erected, and you have the walls put up at one time as they lay on the ground to be lifted up from the ground, lifted up like this, like a barn. So if you were driving down in your horse and buggy down 114, 1743, looking in this direction, looking from north to south, you would see a building staying all by itself with no sheathing on it, no plywood, completely self-contained. They didn't really line anything up with any kind of dimension. There's no 4 foot on center or 16 inches on center like you have today, or 24 inches on center. They built this regardless because there was no sheeting material at that time. No pre-made sheeting by factories. There's only big planks. So where you put the wood didn't really matter. All it mattered that you had someone to put there. Wood was very valuable. To make flat pieces of wood took a lot of time. This is the basic tool they use to shape this with. This is called adze, A-D-Z-E. And it was used to flatten out these parts in the beams. So you see little chips that are taken out of each piece. That's how they got this flat section. They would cut it across the grain first, intervals you can see, at about looks like 4 inches, 5 inches, and then they would sit over it, over the beam like this, get over it like that, and they would all day long just chip away at that beam to get that flat. All for the purpose of attaching lath. For the purpose then of putting plaster on top of that. This would have been a very lengthy process. This wouldn't have been a log cabin like you see in the frontier. This was a finished house with a lot of trim details, beautiful plaster work, and paint. Paint also a very expensive product at that time. Probably was milk paint, it was called at that time. They used calcium-based paint. These timbers go from that wall to that wall. They're not spliced in the middle here. They run all the way through. There's no joint there. These are pieces that run all the way through, which is pretty amazing. It's about a 22 foot tree. But the span's too big. So you have to break the span up with a girder. This is a girder that they spliced in. And you see what they did, they numbered them, each position of each ceiling joist. There's number 8. This one, I can't see the number as well. But they're doing Roman numerals so that the carpenters knew where to position these beams, and then they take this beam down, put it on the ground, and make these notches that are in them, so that they could all fit together nicely and sort of give it that great strength that it needed. This beam was probably a partition because I could stick my hand right in here, and you can see there's a little pocket. So there were probably studs, flat studs going this direction that held up plaster on both sides. So this is most likely was a wall here at one time and not an opening. Maybe a door. We were looking at the distances the other day. I think this might have been a door opening right here at one time. This is not from the 1743. This is more like from the 1930s, 40s, but I don't have one that goes back that far. But this is the kind of saw that they would have used. This is a 2-man saw. One guy down the other end, one guy here. And this is not that big actually. This would have been a medium-sized saw. But this is what they would use to cut these timbers down to length. If they were going to rip a piece, they'd actually have a saw that was as much as 8 feet to 10 feet long, and they would go into a hole in the ground, and it would be this way, and you'd have one guy down the hole, and you have one guy above, and one guy would be pulling up, and one guy would be pulling down. And that's called Bill and Blick. Those are two fellas, the nickname for that job. Usually it was given to you as a punishment because it was such a difficult job, and you would have to be down this nasty hole all day having sawdust falling in your face. So if you got Bill and Blick, you were usually probably not a very happy guy that day. But this is how they did it. Huge teeth on this thing. You could actually cut a piece with this today if you wanted to. It would just take a lot of time. We label as the Tavern room. We're no longer in the 1743 section of the house. If you look up, you can see there's a beam here, which was once the outside wall. This is a very early addition. You can tell again, hand-hewn beam. This time the beams are square on all 4 sides. Very good job. This is beautiful work right here. Very, very beautiful. Probably this happened because they were thinking maybe leaving this exposed. This may have been exposed at one time because you can see that these are finished off. These are finished beams, even sanded a little bit. The reason why we think this is a tavern room is we've seen pictures, drawings of a big table in this room. There's a big table here with benches and chairs. You get this beautiful fireplace. By the way, this is a Rumford fireplace. This is designed by Count Rumford. You see it's very shallow. This fireplace is much more efficient than earlier fireplaces. This room would have gotten nice and warm, by the way, in wintertime. Today, if we had a fire going in here, we could all be in here and be nice and cozy. This is an original fireplace. I'm not sure if this is original or not, but certainly the brickwork is original. What we also know that this was a courthouse at one time, and a meeting house for the town hall, for the town council. And many other things. It was a hospital at one time. It was a boarding house at one time. Now, between 1743 and today, can you imagine all the families that lived here and the people that came and went, right? Amazing. So this room is not from 1743, but still has a lot of great details. Below this paper is a beautiful plank floor, which we're going to expose and sand and bring up so you can see that ultimately. And this room here, we think, was the kitchen at one time. There's actually still an old stove here that was never used here, but I know it was in this room for a very long time. We found holes through the walls to where a stove would be vented out. Unfortunately, it's going to be sheetrock back again because the walls here are very disjointed and of different periods, so we're going to bring back sheetrock in this room. Thank you. Okay, now we're on the second floor of the Havens house, and we're back in the original section of the house, 1743. This is the master bedroom, at least that's what I call it. The reason why I call it that is, one, you can see the southern exposure. This area is the 18th of January, and the sun is pouring through these windows. So the solar gain that these people would have had in this room would have been fantastic. That direction over there is east, so in the morning light would come in through those windows, and all day long you have the solar gain coming through here. So this would be a great room for a bed and for a place to sit and read and be comfortable. We actually think this was a wood stove because you can see there's no firebox here. Not an actual proper firebox, which would have been much more efficient also, and it could have been small, and they might have even burned coal in it. This room, we also found these beautiful beams that we're going to leave exposed. We're going to paint the wood in between the beams so it gets a little bit of light in here. And as you can see right here, we actually replaced these boards just yesterday from other parts of the house. We moved these boards here because there's a big gap to the attic here. So we're gonna replace these boards using boards from the building. We're not bringing anything in that wasn't here originally. So the other thing I want you to notice is that here's the bracing they put here. They put bracing in the corners over here. These are all structural to keep this building from coming down. If you look, you don't see any metal strapping like you are required to do today, what we call hurricane strapping. But remember something, the building was built in 1743. It's been through every hurricane since then, and it's still here. It didn't fall down, didn't get blown away. It's absolutely amazing. This bracing is the reason why. Everywhere you see this has kept the building from collapsing. These floors were covered with 2 1/4 inch yellow pine, sanded probably in the 1950s at some point. But we ripped it up and got rid of it and exposed this beautiful floor, which now we're going to keep. So we're going to sand this floor, and this will be the exposed floor. So this will be an original floor from 1743. Taking this room, there's a couple interesting things in here. You can see these beautiful braces again that are holding the building up. And also, we found writing in chalk on a board up here, and we think it says Asher Havens. And we're looking to see who Asher Havens was. Some people think he's the son of the original Havens that built this. Then we found the letter B over here, which you have no idea what that means. Capital B. Again, this was the outside of the house at one time. The other side of the wall is also an addition. Many of these houses were added on to. That's how it went. You had more children, you added more rooms. As you got more money, you added more rooms. This is pine plank. Some of the pieces are as big as 18 to 20 inches, like downstairs. And these will be the finished floors. Eventually we're going to sand them, you're going to see them, and this will be the finished floor. It's amazing the fact that this building never got renovated to the point to where it's unrecognizable as a historic building. For some reason, either through lack of funds or through the just by pure luck, this didn't burn down. Number one, most of the old houses did burn down, and also it never got renovated to where the windows were replaced and the walls were taken down and made modern. These windows we're looking at, these are the original windows from 1743. In some cases, it's original glass from 1743. So we're so fortunate to have this on Shelter Island. It's a real incredible walk into the past. Removing all this plaster has really sparked a lot of interest, especially with the architect. He's just fascinated, Bill Pedersen, with seeing this structure. And it's so beautiful in a way. And if you look at that wall, for example, through the store, you can see how strange it's framed and how sort of artistic the walls look in their randomness. So this is an extra bedroom. This is an extra bedroom up on the second floor. The room behind all of us, this was an addition added on most likely in 1930s, 1940s, and we have not exposed its framing there because it's not worthy. It's just normal framing, and you can see there's lath and plaster, and on top of that, someone put sheetrock on top of that sometime in the past. Let's take a look at the little room that's going to be the director's office. This is also an addition. You can see the very different method of construction. These beams were milled somewhere else, most likely East Hampton. There was a watermill in East Hampton that ran for a long time. As a matter of fact, there's a town over there called Watermill. And that once ran a blade that cut this wood, and also it also ground down corn and wheat and other things. So you can see planks are still pretty wide, so it's probably pretty early on, probably 1840s, 1870 maybe or so. Just after that period of time, 1890s, electricity started to come into being, and everything started changing. But this room is going to be we're going to sheetrock this back also. We have to get insulation in these walls. Otherwise, we're going to lose a lot of heat. So we're going to insulate the walls, we're going to sheetrock them, and bring the building up to a certain level of energy conservation, sort of practical comfort reasons. Back over here, we have a little area. What's interesting about this room is that this was the bathroom, probably in the 19th century. And before that, remember, the bathrooms were not in houses. Let's take a look in this room. Again, this room is not from 1743. We're still in what we call the addition part of the house, and you can see the beams are different here, spaced apart. This is going to be sheetrocked and used for the administration, but beautiful nonetheless. So we're going to put sheetrock in between these beams and have these beams exposed so you can still see them, because there's a certain amount of beauty to those old timbers. Now we're on the third floor attic space of the Havens house and the original 1743 section. One thing I want to point out is there's a beautiful window right here, and this window, as you see it now, was not original. This window was added. Probably the original one fell apart, and this replaced it. Unfortunately, this is rotting as well, so we're going to replace this. We're going to replicate this window and put a new one in here, so that'll look. The outside look will stay the same. In here, you can see the framing is very old. One thing that's of note, if you're a building buff, you see there's no ridge pole at the top. It's just these rafter sections put together, and then collar ties going across. At one time, this attic was probably not habitable, but there was a time period where this was a boarding house, and I'm sure that these rooms where the ceilings were raised. You could tell if you look over here, there's a big pocket, and this is where a collar tie went across one time. So one time there's a piece of wood just running across about eye level. And they removed that so this could be a room. This became probably a rented space as well as the one over there. This was a boarding house for quite a long time. These rooms would have been spacious for the time period. Somebody asked what these white lines were, and what it is actually is that there were pine strips. We call them furring strips or lath strips, 3/8 by 1.5 inches or so, and they went across perpendicular of these furring strips. And basically, they were nailed up everywhere, all through the space. This whole space was plastered. Walls and ceiling were all plastered. It all came down because it was all very loose and sort of crumbling after all these years. And so what you would have is that this is where the wood was, but this is where the plaster was, which the plaster would go in between each piece, like that. So this coloring is coming the lime that's mixed in with the plaster. And you put lime with plaster to make it smooth and creamy and sort of be able to work it. Lime is a very important aspect of plaster. So this is all plastered by hand. Someone came with a trowel and came over here and they put on many coats. The first coat is called scratch coat. and that was like more like cement mixed with horsehair. They used horsehair to put into it as an aggregate to hold together the cement, and that was put on first, and that was very rough. And that was rough on purpose so that the final coat of the plaster and lime would have something to stick to. And so you could plaster upside down, for example. You could plaster a ceiling and not have a lot of it fall on your face. I tried plastering a couple of times, and it's very difficult. If you don't get that mixture right, it's in your hair, it's in your eyes, it's in your face, it's just unbearable. So you have to be a bit of a chemist and have some experience. I had some old guys show me how to do it, and eventually I got it right. But sheetrock's a lot easier. This is going to be all sheetrocked, and this will be climate controlled, insulated in the future. And unfortunately, you won't be able to see any of this, so that's why it's great to get it on film now, because once you cover it up, it'll be covered up again for until next time it's renovated, 300-400 years from now. I brought along some of my tools I've been collecting for a very long time, since I was a kid, basically. And I've always been fascinated with this sort of thing. I went to an historic restoration when I was a kid called Sturbridge Village in Massachusetts. I think I was about 7 or 8 years old, and I just was overwhelmed with sort of detailing and the effort people put in back in those days to build something. So I just want to show you some of the more unusual ones that I've collected. These are planes. You've probably seen these maybe at yard sales and all, and these are really incredible. If you think about it, mostly men. I don't know if there weren't many women carpenters in those days, but mostly men would have to put a piece of wood on the bench and then push it through by hand to make this is a half lap. You can see the little shape of the base plate to make a half lap in a piece of wood. It would take days upon days upon days to make enough to do a house like this. Months and months of pushing physically. I think the people in those days have very strong arms and a lot of determination. This one is for making beading. You can see it's a round bead in this one, and that was also for decorative purposes. So it was no easy task when someone said I want to have nice trim with a bead on it. That meant maybe 3 or 4 months of someone working to make it all. Of course, labor was cheap, but nonetheless, it took a lot of time. This is I just love the beauty of this piece. This is a little tack hammer, but it just was handmade by someone, a blacksmith put this together, and I got this actually from Walter Brigham on Shelter Island, and he used it until he passed away. So this is a beautiful little tack hammer that just like one of those pieces I just can't help but fall in love with. I also have this sort of like these little devices. This is, just this is for string. So when you want to make a building straight or you want to make a foundation, the best way to make a nice straight line is a piece of string. Put a post to the ground, run it out, pull it tight, and use your string. But of course, this keeps the string nicely organized. And of course, we talked about the ads a little bit before. This is an old ads. This actually did not come from New York State. This came from the Amish in Pennsylvania. You got to remember, the Amish today still build like this. This kind of construction does still go on. It's just not done commercially as much, but it's done by groups like the Amish and the Mennonites in Pennsylvania and Ohio, Indiana, places like that. This is a double-headed axe. Some people say, why 2 heads, right? And they're kind of scary and dangerous. Well, this is the morning side and this is the evening side. So they would cut the wood all morning with this, take a break, and then switch around and use the other side. So this would stay nice and sharp. Both sides would stay nice and sharp. And they used to mark it often with chalk. So that's pretty cool. Some of these tools also, you notice that they're very like sort of artistically designed. If you look at tools today, they're just so made of plastic and they don't have all this beautiful detailing on them. Like, why did someone add that, right? Just because it's their own personal touch. So tools are personalized. Each company had its own little design. Things weren't so standardized as they are today. This is a pile of wood that we sort of scavenged. I just want to show you these beams, sort of interesting things about them. Look at this one here. You see how it's all squared off like that? And that would have been the ads work that did that. So the person would have stood on top of this beam, gone along it like this, and chopped away at the top of it. First you would take a saw and you would cut these slices, cross-cut slices across, probably this one looks like every 3 inches. And you go along and you would just swing it carefully like this, all along, and popped off the surface till you got that nice flat look. Of course, it's not perfectly flat like if you had today through a table saw, but it's flat enough. You also see, like in this one, this has a tenon. A tenon is this pin sticking out. This whole section here is a tenon. This would be the pin that would go through the tenon. So sometimes this is called a mortise, and this is called a tenon, this is called a pin. So this was the interlocking aspect of a post and beam building. Again, one of the secrets to its very strong structure that could take hurricanes and snow loads and wind. Incredible. This beam in my hand, it's probably 300 years old, and it's very heavy still. This is very heavy. This is not at all light and dried up. This is absolutely white oak. One of the heaviest woods out there. But it's impervious to bugs, for example. The British made ships out of it. That's one of the reasons why the British were interested in Shelter Island, because of the large white oak timbers that were here to build ships out of. This is an auger. This is what they used to make that big hole over there before. And you can see there's a hole. I didn't make this one. This has already been in there already. But you see, here's your mortise, and they would drill a hole with this auger. They would start it in a hole like this, and they just turn it like this, and work their way through the wood. And then they would eventually make a hole big enough to put a pin through, and that would hold this piece of timber in here, just like you see the hole in this tongue right here, in this tenon. So it's really, it was really something. They really thought about this. This is European technology, actually. All this was happening in England and Europe and France. There are many houses over there still existing at that time. People actually live in them. In America, you know, our country is much younger. It's only at best 300 years or so. Over in Europe, you have houses that are 600-700 years old, built the same way as this was built. So this is these people who built this considered themselves British at the time. Remember, America wasn't a country yet. These were English citizens at the time, British citizens.